Hello, I'm Robert Sweeney, and I'm the author of You're Not Just a Diagnosis, Using Trauma-Informed Techniques to Create Your Best Life. And what I want to talk about today is creativity itself. How do we become creative? Now, I want to start with a myth that a lot of people have about creativity, and that is that it's just sort of a trait you're born with. Some of us are creative, some of us are not. That's not necessarily true. Creativity, the act of making something, of creating something that exists because you did it, is a skill that anyone can learn if they just put the effort to it. Now, a man named Robert Fritz wrote a book called The Path of Least Resistance about creativity, and I'll be talking about some of his concepts here. There will be links to some of his videos, some of his books. Robert continues to work now as a composer, as an educator, as a speaker for business, and we have a great deal of respect for the work that he's done, and I think you should look into it if you're interested in more about creativity. But for right now, let's just talk about briefly the skill of learning to create. Creativity, Robert says, is a process. It has 6 very distinctive steps that if you follow those steps, you'll find that you've been creative. The first step is to choose to create something that you really want to see exist. It's not solving a problem, which is a little different than creating something. Solving a problem is finding something that's not right, something that's imbalanced, something that's not just, and fixing it. Taking something away, working on something that has some kind of negative connotation. Creating is choosing something that doesn't exist unless you do something about it and making it exist. It's not solving a problem, it's making something. Now, a lot of people will talk about creativity as if it's some sort of out of the box. It's different. You're creative if you use more colors than other people. You're creative if you come up with an idea no one else has ever had. You're creative if the way you look at things is different from everybody else. This sort of out of the box thinking. And one of the things that Robert Fritz points out is that that's not how creative people work. The step after choosing to create something, the second step, is to visualize the end result, to get a very clear picture in your head of what you want to make, create, or do. And what you'll find when you do that is that it's not making something out of nothing. Creation in this existence, in this universe, is taking things that already exist and combining them in a new way to make something that didn't exist until you combine them. It's your effort that makes the difference. You're not making something out of nothing. You're making something out of all those things around you that you think would go together into that item, concept, experience, whatever it is that you've visualized that you're creating. So the clearer you get a vision in your head of what you want, the easier it is to know what you're going to do about it. You know it's done when it looks like what the picture in your head looked like. Now, one of the things that most people will point out is that when you're being creative, you're making something that didn't exist before, and you're using all these elements, you're combining things together. Often, the finished product isn't exactly what you had pictured. And that's just a matter of attitude about how I'm not going to make the picture so rigid, my work so hard, that it has to be exactly what I pictured. I'm going to use that picture in my head to tell me exactly what I want. If I want a chess piece, I want something that will fit on the board that looks like a king. But there are 1,000 different kinds of chess piece kings. So I will visualize the idea that I'm going to carve this little king, this chess piece, to go on my chessboard. But what I create, what I carve, is not going to be exactly like someone else's or exactly like what I pictured. It's going to look just like what I wanted a king to look like in the process of the creation itself. Now, remember when I was talking about how people think that being creative means being outside the box? One of the things that Robert Fritz points out is that creative people don't work outside the box. Creative people actually start by setting up what the real box is. They look at boundaries. Once you establish what your true boundaries are, you're free to be as creative as you want to within those boundaries. Let's do a little experiment. While you're listening to me right now, I want you to be creative. Go ahead, just be creative. Do the most creative thing you can think of right now. Kind of tough, isn't it? Let me give you a little more help. How about I will give you a piece of paper and a pencil, and I want you to draw something. A little easier, right? But not very easy. What am I supposed to draw? I'm not a good drawer. I don't like using pencils. All kinds of stuff, right? Let me try something else. I'm going to give you a piece of paper, a pencil, 2 minutes, and I'm going to ask you to draw a bunny. Doesn't have to be a great bunny. Just draw me a bunny and make it done in 2 minutes. Here's a pencil. Here's the paper. Clock is ticking. Go. A lot easier that way. Imagine doing that with that level of instruction. What I've done is I've set boundaries for you. This piece of paper, this pencil, this finished project, this amount of time. Every one of those boundaries that I set actually created a new level of freedom on your part. You didn't have to draw a horse. You didn't have to draw a king. You didn't have to draw on a village. You had to draw a bunny. You didn't have to sculpt. You didn't have to paint. You didn't have to bring in other people from the outside. You didn't have to photograph. You had to use a piece of paper and a pencil. This piece of paper, this pencil, in this time. The time was important, but we'll get to that later. The step that I gave you, setting those boundaries, was also involved in another step called gathering your resources. When you're going to create something, often there's more than one thing that goes into the act of the creation. If it's sculpting on marble, you need more than just a piece of marble. You need something you're going to cut that marble with. If you're going to paint, you need the canvas and the paints, the thing you're going to use as a model, or the picture in your head. You need the time. You need the place to do this. You can't just paint in the middle of the street where the buses run by. You also, in many instances, use the resources and expertise and the assistance of other people. In fact, the most creative things that we can think about involve teamwork with other folks. That's a resource. And what that does, that resource creates a boundary. If I'm going to use my grandmother and I'm not using my uncle, my grandmother brings certain skills and perceptions to the table. My uncle does not. That sets a boundary for me. But within that, grandma and her expertise is far greater than is necessary for this little creation I'm making. So it creates extra freedom. She has extra to bring to the table. It's easier with her assistance, and it's more creative and freer with her help than it would be without. I've created a boundary, but I've also made freedom within that boundary and within those resources. I've given myself extra help, and it works better because of that. Now, remember when I said about drawing the bunny that you only had 2 minutes? I set a deadline. One of the things that Robert Fritz pointed out in his book, The Path of Least Resistance, is that what you want to do when you're creating something is make it the easiest thing you can possibly do. The path of least resistance is the path of actually creating the thing. And one of the problems that people have is they will give themselves unlimited time. I can do it anytime I want. I have all the time in the world. And when that happens, nothing gets done. They don't do it because there's no push. There's no deadline. It can happen when it happens. If you create a time limit, you create a deadline, it not only creates another boundary that gives you freedom, it also creates an energy. It gives you a drive. Think of a rubber band that's been stretched and is pulling towards the end product. That's that deadline telling you we've got to get this done. We've got to get this done. It's pulling you to the end. It's creating that path of least resistance to actually doing the job because my deadline is looming. I only have this amount of time. It also takes all that pressure away from how long do I have to keep working, and how many times do I have to re-edit, and how much detail do I have to have. If I only have 2 minutes, it's not going to be a very fancy bunny, buddy. I'm going to draw a quick 2-minute bunny. That's all it needs to be. Because when you drew the bunny and you stepped away, it was a bunny. You created something. It exists because of your effort. You were creative. And the deadline helped. The next step in his description of creativity, Robert Fritz, is called the actual work it, the do the job. You have to actually do the creativity to be creative. That kind of makes sense, right? But people will skip that because they'll sit there visualizing and visualizing and visualizing and setting deadlines and gathering materials and talking to people and setting deadlines and resetting deadlines. They don't do the work. That's the most important part after start. Do the work. And then the final step is walk away. When the deadline hits and you finish the project to the best of your ability with the resources you have, within the boundaries you've got, and the thing is done, set it down, put it aside, whatever it is, and step away from it. It's not you, it's what you made. It's the thing you created, not your existence. You, as an individual, are separate from your creation. And until you separate yourself from it and say, this is done, I have done it, it is, it exists because of my effort, it doesn't exist. You didn't create. You're still working it. Stop. Stop. Now, how do we apply this to creating your best life? Think of your life as something that you have the opportunity to create out of the combinations of things around you. Your whole life is the act of creating experiences, of creating a life, doing these steps. Automatically, we have a boundary set in that our time is limited, and we don't know how much time we have. We're all given a life at birth, but none of us knows how long we're going to live before death. It could be a short time, it could be a long time, but we know it's limited. So we have that boundary, and within that boundary, we have the freedom to live our best possible life. The first step is to choose to do it. I'm going to take control of my life, and I'm going to live it to the best of my ability. I'm going to live the best life I possibly can. That's the first step. And often people will wait to make that choice, or they will have made that choice as a child. Many people do, and say, I'm going to live the best possible life I can, and they kind of get lost in the process. They sort of miss what they were doing. They kind of miss the point. Visualize the result. Know the life that you want to live if it was a good life, not just the one that you expect to have, the one that you want. Remember in another video we talked about basic needs and our wants to meet our basic needs. Everybody has the same basic needs. Well, the truth is everybody has the same basic needs, but in different combination. Some people will choose that they need very strong relationships, while other people don't need that interpersonal relationships nearly as strong, but they need fun and freedom far more. Other people will need physiological things. They have issues and challenges with their body, and so they have to spend a lot of time concentrating on that. But they also need fun and freedom, power and control, love and belonging, and purpose in their lives. It can't be overwhelming and overriding to the point they don't meet those other needs, or else they're unhappy. They're not getting what they want. They're not living their best possible life. So you have to meet all those needs, getting what you want. And you start by visualizing what you want your life to be. What is my best life? Then you gather the resources and you create the boundaries. There are some things I will not do. They're outside my boundaries. I don't need to do those things to live a good life, and I'm not going to. On the other hand, there are things I will love doing, and I will do them as often as I can because they are within my boundaries and they are part of my best life. I'm going to do them, and I'm going to bring people along. I'm going to share those experiences with others. That's part of creating those boundaries and gathering those resources. I know there's a deadline, and the next step is to actually actively live my best life. Do the best that I can. There will be setbacks. There will be things that go wrong. It happens. That doesn't mean I'm not creating the best life. It means it's another challenge in the moment, and I have to keep working it. I have to change my vision just a little bit, but it doesn't change my overall vision or the concept of doing the best that I can. And finally, someday, I'll be gone, and I have to walk away from my life. We don't know what happens after we're gone to the individual who leaves us. What we do know is that when they're gone, we remember them and their lives and whom they've touched, what they've done. What we want to do is create the best possible life that touches people in the way we wanted to, creating memories and experiences in the world that we wanted, creating the best world that we could on our way out the door, so that those behind us remember us and remember the life we've created as the best life we could have lived. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll look forward to talking with you and learning from you while you create your best life.